Throughout my childhood, I would always spend Christmas Day visiting my aunt and uncle's house for Christmas dinner. We would have a good laugh and get together, stuff ourselves fuller than the Christmas turkey itself, and watch a good bit of Doctor Who in the evening. And at the end of the day, when we would drive home tired and half asleep, not the driver, thankfully, we would sometimes pass by an old steam train gallery where old steam trains were kept on display outside that I would occasionally spot for half a second on the way back home at night. I don't know why, but there was always something I found oddly haunting about glimpsing these dark, stationary locomotives looming in the dead of night. I mention all of this because considering how eerie I found these steam engines to look, I find it quite fascinating that a new indie horror game has incorporated this machine as the main enemy of a survival horror game. Only instead of looming subtly, this project ends up transforming one into a crazy 8-legged monster that charges up to you out of a forest ready to gnash your face off at any moment's notice. And thus was born Choo-Choo Charles. And what a bizarre concept this is too when you think about it. What's next? A sequel starring an evil trotter named Trevor? Or something akin to that one Combine Harvester from Pixar's Cars that I'm sure gave a few kids nightmares? You are brought to this haunted island of Not-So-Door that is home to the entity known as the titular Charles, a horrible mutant spider morphed into a steam engine that you have been asked to rid said island of by finding 3 eggs hidden in mineshafts scattered around the place. In order to navigate the island, you are provided with your own small train with a mounted weapon on the rear to ride along the laid out tracks. And whilst you're on your quest, the signature spider train will occasionally hoot its whistle and jump out from the trees where your only hope of survival is to climb onto your train and shoot the ever-loving daylight out of it until it buggers off back into the wilderness. But of course, you'll need to upgrade your own locomotive in order to stand any chance of taking down the beast in the long run, which is done by talking to NPCs offering side quests all across the map in exchange for scrap. As opposed to giving it straight to you since their own lives are in peril from an abomination they can't fight against, and helping the acclaimed rescuer unconditionally might be their only chance of survival. Said quests can range from fetching one item that's approximately 5 whole yards away from you, to a couple of comparatively more interesting assignments. One of these was a mission where you have to wade through a swamp to retrieve an animal carcass for a witch's brew, whilst avoiding a bog monster named Barry. Yes, I'm being serious, that was his name, whom I learned can be avoided by simply standing still for a few seconds. Its presence is only announced by a few splash particles and little else, so while one of the more interesting missions, it does lose a bit of its threat quickly after that. There's also a mission that acts more as a minigame, taking direct inspiration from the old internet favourite of Slender the 8 Pages, whereby you must literally collect 8 pages in a forest while shadow ghost things constantly chase you from behind. This was easily at this point the scariest part of the whole game, and it genuinely drew me in. Until I realised that the ghosts don't actually do any harm and kind of just chuck you out of their small area without actually doing any harm. And as such, they ended up feeling more like a nuisance as I spent 10 minutes searching for that one final page only to get ambushed by Charles as soon as I did find it. Oh my god, finally! Oh. There we go. Shit. Shit. Oh, he's up there. There he is. I fear no man, but that shit! Okay, I'm probably sounding a bit too harsh here, so let's address what is the elephant in the room here. This game is relatively low budget compared to what you might expect these days, meaning it's a very short game where you can easily complete every single mission in less than 3 hours, with the missions again sometimes being extremely quick and basic, and the human animations being so jagged they genuinely come off as comedic, like the NPCs have somehow achieved telepathy because quite jarringly nobody's lips ever seem to move whenever somebody speaks. But with all that in mind, it is important to emphasize that while this game is totally trying to match the elements of a AAA survival horror in this age, with its side quests and combat sequences and using past successful games as its template, this is all very much compiled by one person with the occasional help here and there. And with this in mind, it makes the scale of the world and the mechanics at play suddenly very impressive with the sheer ambition of it all. The fact that it's perfectly playable for its grand scale, I never found any game-breaking bugs myself, and that most of the gameplay feels perfectly smooth and natural deserves a round of applause in itself. And while the environment can get a tiny bit repetitive and samey around parts, it still visually looks great and the terraforming looks very natural, which helps immerse you greatly into this setting. The gameplay again feels very smoothed out, and absent is the janky nature often attributed to a lot of early indie games. Even the cheap animations, and lack thereof, add this odd charm to the game, and it honestly would not feel the same without it. Oh, and when I mentioned the combat, you can only fire guns from your train and cannot carry any of them with you, meaning that any armed bad guys you encounter, who look like extras pulled straight out of the Purge films, have to be awkwardly sprinted past if they spot you like you've just dodged the train fare, unless you can coax them over to your train, but I digress. But now let us actually talk about the star of the show himself, Charles the Choo-Choo Train. This is the part where you cannot take any shortcuts, since this is the main selling point of this game that determines once and for all if it's worth sitting through the ride or jumping straight out the window like the conductors now found out you skipped the ticket fare. Thankfully, I am pleased to say that Charles is easily one of the strongest parts of the game. Where the animation on the human NPCs falters, Charlie stands out as by far the most polished of them all, which is necessary being the one NPC you'll be looking at the most, however ugly his mug might be. He will bolt out from the wilderness seemingly at random, indicating his presence with a faint, distant whistle should you ever get too comfortable. And I love how he could pop out at any random, unscripted time, which leaves spontaneity and dread for when this horrible creature might appear and halt whatever you are trying to do, which makes you genuinely feel like you are actually being hunted down by this thing. And even then, it might be a question of whether or not he'll actually spot you or not. It leaves just enough time to return to the safety of your train if you've hopped off for a quick scavenge of railside scraps, but if you're really far away, then you might as well have tied yourself down onto the tracks for the oncoming monster train. Being pursued by Charles behind your locomotive brings the most adrenaline-pumping moments the game has to offer, especially when you have to balance shooting the train long enough he'll decide to peace out, and backing off to spam the repair button as he beats your own train into a pulp. It is a simple rinse and repeat, but going through this cycle every now and again is definitely one of the most fun parts of the game, and is infrequent enough not to feel too repetitive, like most random encounters in RPG games. Your ammunition is unlimited, but your weapons will temporarily disable if they overheat from too much use, which offers a good challenging and engaging endurance test against the creature in every single encounter. At the end of the day, it is important to remember what Choo-Choo Charles essentially is. It is an indie game developed for the most part by one singular person. As such, not every aspect will be as fleshed out or smoothly polished as one might expect when comparing it to the AAA industry today. The game itself feels like it's attempting to scale itself akin to a AAA game with its presentation, but while that does make its weaknesses stick out a lot more, I have to admire the ambition behind this small project. It feels like one of those silly ideas that you just have stuck at the back of your head for years and years that you've always wanted to just put out in some sort of medium, and then it just becomes your passion project. It's a short, focused, and charming survival horror that offers a fun, fast-paced, not-so-serious gimmick that is very reasonably priced for what is packaged. Sure, it doesn't hold a lantern to some indie survival horrors like Amnesia, but it still manages to stay on the rails better than even some AAA horror these days.